Tuesday, I released a video exploring an alternate Congress of Vienna, where every single border change was voted on and decided by you guys, the viewers. Now this is the map you guys ended up with, and I won't lie, it's a travesty. Quite nothing about this map makes any realistic sense. Russia lost territory after their victory, France lost territory in a rather arbitrary way, while Sardinia-Piedmont is incredibly dominant in Italy, while neither France nor Austria have any influence there to balance it out. But most importantly, there is one important fact to keep in mind. While we know that it was the YouTube commenters who decided on this outcome, the people living in this alternate world don't. The great powers simply met up in Vienna and, for some reason, all agreed to this outcome. This fact is devastating for especially Russia. Why? Because it was none other than Tsar Alexander who went to Vienna on Russia's behalf. He has no one other than himself to blame for the state that Europe is in now. His popularity would completely plummet within Russia, as with a single stroke of a pen, he has given away pretty much all of the gains he made during his reign. Russia had struggled against Napoleon, only to be forced to release territory after their victory. In light of this, I fully expect Alexander to be removed after a violent coup, just like his father, Paul I, was assassinated by his officer corps. His replacement would either be Nicholas I or Constantine, both younger brothers to Alexander. Constantine was generally uninterested in politics though, so I would put Nicholas forwards as the next Tsar. So, good job voters, it's not even a year after the conclusion of the Congress of Vienna and you've already caused the death of a monarch. Either way, we return to the map to notice an interesting quirk. While these are the borders agreed upon at Vienna, in reality, Europe still looks something like this, with massive occupation zones across the continent. Slowly, but steadily, nations were retreating from these occupied territories, but one of the last regions that would still be occupied would be Poland, as Russia drags their feet in actually retreating. By this point, Russia had more mobilized forces than any of the other great powers combined, and Nicholas I, under pressure from his nobility, denounces the Congress of Vienna that his predecessor signed and announces his intention to annex Poland into Russia. Already, within a year, we are in crisis mode. The great powers denounce the Russian action, although France remains suspiciously silent. A diplomatic standoff ensues, but let's be honest, nobody feels inclined to actually go to war. Frantic diplomatic talks back and forth follow, and this would already result in the first rewrite of Europe's borders post-Vienna. Russia agrees to leave Poland and respects the independence of Finland, but in exchange, Russia's borders are restored to the borders of the Second Partition. The remainder of Poland is closely linked to Austria, who even gives them Galicia, in hopes that this will make them strong enough to stand up to Russia in the future. So, luckily, Europe hasn't devolved into brutal conflict yet, but the borders you guys voted on didn't even survive the first decade, and the Russian sentiment of betrayal and humiliation is far from over, as they still feel that Poland and Finland should rightfully belong to them. Sorry for the quick intermission, but most of you aren't subscribed. To keep up to date with the 2 videos I release every single week, consider doing so. Thank you. Next up, unrest across Europe. Now that the immediate aftermath of Napoleon is solved, Europe is in a slow recovery. But Napoleon has spread his ideals of liberalism by force, while the French occupation of Europe has awoken feelings of nationalism, especially in Germany and Italy, the regions most heavily reorganized by Napoleon's conquests. During this period, we would likely see a revolution remove the Bourbons from power in France again, while the Spanish too have a revolution against the unpopular government that allowed Catalonia to break away. A crazy concession, considering that Spain was a major factor in defeating Napoleon. In Italy, several revolutions would call for a unified state, but none of the Italian powers wants to claim the mantle of unifier yet, concerned about great power disapproval after making such a move. So for now, peace has indeed held in Europe, good job, but only for a couple of reasons. Both France and Russia have extensive expansion plans, but they cannot be the first to act, or else there is a high chance that the other powers form a coalition against one of them. Secondly, 2 decades of French revolutionary wars have been devastating for all powers involved. For the first decades, everyone simply needs time to rebuild. But as we enter a new decade, we need to focus in on the Dutch. I saw everyone in the comments be excited about the great future that this Dutch Empire will have, as they did keep Sri Lanka and South Africa, territories which they lost to the British in our timeline, while in Europe they have expanded massively into France. But as a Dutchman myself, it pains me to say, they likely aren't better off in this alternate timeline. First, the addition of the colonies is great, but they didn't make the Dutch immensely wealthy before the Napoleonic Wars, so why would they suddenly do so afterwards? Fact is, the Dutch and their way of making money was on the decline. The Dutch were doubling down on old-fashioned trade, while industrialization was on the rise. And the Dutch king didn't really make things better. The southern lowlands was the second most industrialized region in the world, only behind Britain, while the north was still focused on trade like they were historically. So, you'd think that a great compromise would see the north trading away the things that the south produces to the rest of the world. But this solution just made sure that the north were the ones who profited greatly from the work that the south did. To further worsen the situation, the north was predominantly Protestant, while the south was Catholic. The king didn't really do anything to ease tensions, mostly leaving Catholics and French speakers out of the government and ruling with Protestant Dutch. Now, this may not be the best plan, since by far the majority of the nation is Catholic. This was already the case in our timeline, but this has only gotten worse with the additional French land. If we don't change the character of the Dutch king, the south will eventually revolt. And this Belgian revolt has significantly higher stakes in this alternate timeline, as it's France's first chance to really flex their muscles. Whoever rules France at the time would want to make use of this opportunity and support the rebels. Not even just in hopes of regaining lost lands, but even just splitting up their powerful northern neighbor is a smart plan. International controversy is sparked when French forces cross the border to defend the Belgians. But this is where the Dutch are put in a much worse position. Not only do the French have territories that they would like to demand, they also rule over German territories which Prussia would like, and even the British are still very interested in gaining especially South Africa. The conclusion to this standoff would be devastating for the Dutch. Initially, the British would oppose any territorial readjustments, but restoring Dutch rule to an unruly south isn't realistic either. Setting up a Belgian state is also an option, but that would just add another state that couldn't oppose France without foreign intervention. Compromise was necessary to solve this issue. The British dropped their support for the Dutch, who are sidelined for the negotiations. The French regain their former lands back, and as compensation, the Prussians get to annex Luxembourg and Belgium gains their independence. The British, on the world stage, at least take South Africa. The Dutch emerge from this crisis completely humiliated and mutilated, but at least European peace is preserved. But after the next round of revolutions, Europe wouldn't be so lucky. The first region to watch is Italy. In our timeline, it was Austria that kept the peace in the region. They had puppeteered most of the small states and intervened several times to keep the status quo intact. This task is far more difficult in this alternate timeline, giving great opportunity for an Italian state, most likely Sardinia-Piedmont, to claim the mantle of unifier. As a wave of revolutions overtake the peninsula, Sardinia slowly grows as revolutionaries choose to align with them, especially when the other significant Italian state, the Two Sicilies, falls to revolutionaries as well. The great powers look at the situation with worried eyes, but nobody intervenes directly. Why? Because a fresh wave of revolution was rocking over Europe, and some of the most affected nations were Austria and France. In France, both the House of Bourbon and the House of Orléans had proven incredibly unpopular, and a new revolution had reinstated a republic, likely with Napoleon III as president, nephew to the original, promising to restore France to Napoleonic greatness. But Austria was in an even worse position. The Hungarian portion of the empire had always been weary of German domination over the nation. The Congress of Vienna had only made this worse by adding significant German territories in Bavaria, further increasing the German population of the empire. The moment that the Hungarian portion of the empire revolts, and I'm sure they would eventually, the first domino falls, which would bring down any semblance of balance within Europe. Because Austria had one absolutely crucial job which these revolts would absolutely hamper, and that job was defending Poland. Poland is not necessarily a weak state by any means, but they couldn't stand up to Russia by themselves. With Austria in open revolt, Russian forces cross into Poland. Britain cries out for intervention, but realistically, who is even there to heed the call? France straight up doesn't care, they want to focus on reunification before they even consider the balance of power in Europe. Austria was absolutely not able to, and while Prussia would be able to, they wouldn't really be enthusiastic about having to carry a war against Russia. Especially since they are also tasked with peacekeeping in Germany now that Austria was busy and all. With Europe occupied with Poland and Austria in revolt, Napoleon III knows that this is his best time to strike and win easy points by overrunning the smaller break-off states around him. France launches an invasion of Brittany and overruns the small state without any opposition. To the south, a Franco-Spanish alliance is concluded, which overruns Catalonia, making Napoleon III a French legend, finally reversing the humiliation of Vienna. At this point, Britain already has two rogue great powers to deal with, but no one to help them deal with them. But things would get even worse in Germany. In our timeline, liberal revolutionaries offered Wilhelm of Prussia the throne of Germany, but he refused, denouncing their liberal intentions. But in this alternate timeline, Europe is in chaos. France and Russia could very well soon be in positions to threaten Germany. In this frame of mind, with Austria unable to counterbalance Prussia and the German Confederation already dysfunctional, Prussia takes on the role of protector of Germany, possibly even slowly moving towards naming themselves Germany fully as nationalists overrun some regions and request integration into Prussia. Forming a united German government could very well happen to ensure protection both from revolutionaries as well as from Russia and France. Phew, that was a lot. Let's pause a bit and recap. Within a couple of years, the map went from this to this. Utter madness. The radical shift in borders shows us just how impressive our own timeline's Congress of Vienna was and why YouTube viewers probably shouldn't be diplomats. The carefully crafted balance of our timeline ensured that the great powers acted together to prevent change. Best shown in 1848, when Austria and France together prevented Italy from unifying, while Prussia beat down revolts across Europe and also attempted to break Schleswig-Holstein off from Denmark, only to be stopped in this power move by the other great powers. Most importantly though, during the Hungarian Revolution, the Russians crossed into the Habsburg Empire. Not as conquerors, while the Habsburgs were in a weak state, but in an attempt to restore order in Hungary. By the end of the wave of revolutions, very few borders had actually changed and very few governments had actually collapsed. Something which cannot quite be said about the timeline that we have created. The big question now becomes, can Austria break the revolters? If they can, some return to normalcy may be possible. But should the revolters be successful, Austria as a great power is just over. And if I'm completely honest, I very much doubt that the Austrians could break the revolt, as in our timeline, they needed hundreds of thousands of Russians to help them do it. This alternate Austria is even weaker, not having the rich Italian territories of Lombardia and Venice, nor the Polish territory of Galicia. I even consider it a real possibility that during this revolt, the newly unified Italy invade to complete their unification. By the end of this period, the Habsburgs are thoroughly humbled, while the new states would immediately start fighting about the borders of their nations, but we will not dive into their petty squabbles. As on the continent-wide scale, Austria is now gone, which removes our final hope for peace as the great powers are set to go head-to-head for continental supremacy. Our teams are most likely France, Spain and Russia against Britain and Germany. I also consider it a real possibility that with Austria in such a weak position, pro-German revolutions occur, creating a massive Germany in Central Europe. With this, the future of the world is in a precarious situation, with two aggressive, expansionist great powers pitted against the final defenders of order in Europe. Still, Britain and Germany are easily the stronger team. I expect the war to come soon, as Russia and France, boisterous, likely start a war over some damned foolish thing in the Balkan. Britain easily has the naval advantage over the Atlantic, while the Russians can at least hold the alliance off for British reinforcements to arrive. The loyalty of minor states is up in the air, but realistically, the only minor state that matters is Italy. But I must be honest, even if Italy joins up with the French and the Russians, I'd still put my money on the German alliance. Why? Because Britain at this time is just such a beefcake of a nation. This European war is extremely early, and Britain by this point produced 65% of Europe's iron and steel and consumed almost 80% of its coal. I very much expect the Germans and the Brits to eventually overpower the Russians and the French. In the peace deal, restore Vienna would be on the lips of the victorious powers. So first, nations like Catalonia and Brittany are split off again. Germany pushes its border and Belgium is re-strengthened as well. The minor new states are put under great power influence this time to prevent France from conquering them again. Russia would lose Baltic territories to Germany while Poland is recreated. By this point, the German-British alliance would break down as Europe suddenly becomes very aware of Germany's growing hegemony. So it's about time to recap your accomplishments as diplomats. As a direct result of your votes, Europe is now in tatters, with Germany reigning supreme in Europe. But honestly, what did you expect? You humiliated France and Russia, and even Spain, setting them up to be the boogeyman of Europe, while massively strengthening Prussia and leaving Sardinia-Piedmont as the only major power with easy influence in Italy. The way you guys set up Europe after Napoleon, there was simply no other alternative to complete collapse. But don't worry, I am going to give you another shot. In the next episode, I may make a huge mistake, as I will give you the opportunity to redo the Berlin Conference, allowing the viewers to divide up Africa between the colonial powers. Subscribe to be notified when the community posts about that poll come out, so you too can participate. But that's where I'll end this video. Thank you all for watching, consider leaving a like and a comment to support the content, and subscribe for 2 more videos every single week. To continue watching, click on one of the 2 videos on screen now. Again, thank you all for watching, and goodbye.